pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo,
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, May 26, 2022. I'm Kevin Laramie and I'll be joined by Duane Rollins in a second. We'll please take a second and subscribe to our YouTube page at youtube.com/Sports Podcasting Network, as we love to have new subscribers to our YouTube page. But Duane, we're going to start the show with some breaking news earlier today, as Canada Soccer has announced it is canceling the Canada-Iran game that was supposed to take place next week at BC Place, the friendly. It was a point of contention and has now been made official. It has been canceled by Canada Soccer.
Yep. I spoke to people from the CSA this morning. What I was told is this was directly a political choice, fully and completely. It was not a sporting choice in any way whatsoever. The CSA, as you might imagine, is upset about this, is frustrated by this. It's going to cost them a considerable amount of money, and more to a sporting perspective, it's going to hurt them in terms of the preparation for the World Cup, which is what this was all about. Now, look, we talked about this a couple days ago on the show in detail. We got into the politics side of it a little bit at that time. I'm not dismissing the valid arguments that are made to not to have scheduled this game. In the purpose of this conversation right now, I'm only speaking to what this means from a sporting perspective. And as I said, that means that Canada now is going to be very difficult for them to find an opponent to play on that date. I was told the CSA is looking into options, but that they are not hopeful that they can find something in such short notice. If they do, this is me speculating now, but if they do, it would probably be an island team, like a Caribbean island team that's not playing, that they maybe have a lot of US-based players and they could maybe gabble something together quick, or perhaps they might end up playing a friendly against the Whitecaps reserves or something. Like, honestly, that's where we're at right now. That's unfortunate. In terms of the politics, I don't want to get into them right here. I understand why people feel aggrieved by what happened at the terrorist attack a couple of years ago where the plane was shot down. I'm not dismissing the loss of human life there. I'm not dismissing the atrocities of the Iranian government. I'm not dismissing the atrocities of anyone. I just think it's a zero-sum game when you try and get into this, like, you have to play a perfect opponent. They're not out there. They're not, including us. No. Including us with our Aboriginal rights, right?
For sure. But let's just read the actual nomenclature of this tweet. Canada Soccer has cancelled the international match that was scheduled for June 5th, 2022 against Iran as part of the men's national team preparations for the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022. Additional details will be provided at all ticket purchasers, and also if you're a member of Canada Red and the Soccer Nation, then you'll have more information in the next few days. Let's talk about on the pitch what it means for the Canadian men's national team. The reason why Iran was chosen as their opponent in this window, it was chosen by John Herdman, manager, head coach, the sélectionneur, we would say, of the Canada men's national team, because of their style of play that is similar to Morocco. They have a similar build of play, similar type of players, and similar type of output when we're looking at the attacking angles and where they come and attack at you from a little bit more on the left side of the pitch if we get bogged down in the tactical details. But Iran and Morocco play in a similar fashion, and that was why it was chosen as an opponent for Canada in this window of preparations for Qatar 2022.
Yeah, look, this was a sporting decision, and it was a decision that I've been told was completely steered by the technical side of things. John Herdman and his staff got down to business. They crunched the numbers. They looked at the different variations with the one caveat that the game was going to be held in BC. So they had that limited their choices a bit there. And that choice was to give the fans of British Columbia an opportunity to see this team. So that was an important consideration for the Canadians. And also the tickets they could sell. BC Place is a big venue. It's one of the two biggest venues that they could host games on, or three, I guess, including Commonwealth. They hadn't had a game there, so that was the choice there. So with those factors in play, John Herdman came down, went to work, and found this as an opponent. What I was told by those with knowledge of this is that if there's fault here to be had, it would be the CSA trying to be too nice to everyone involved in this and not understanding instinctively the kind of political fallout that this might have, particularly in British Columbia, where a lot of the victims of the tragedy are located. So there was a mistake in optics and a mistake in communication that occurred here. Does that mean heads should roll? No, but there should be an internal review of some type to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and that the September friendlies, which I believe are going to be held in France, from what I've heard, or at least Europe anyway. France is the country I'm hearing, and the possibility of Algeria and possibly even France itself being involved in those friendlies in the fall. But that's the distance. But yeah, it's a mess, and I don't know what they could have done differently other than to not entirely listen to the sports side of things. Is the reality is you have to factor in the politics. This was done the moment that it got to the House of Commons, and there started to be this momentum. And a lot of people that were speaking out against this game really had no sporting considerations at all in their mind. They just wanted to shut the game down for their own political means. I'm not
of course.
commenting on that. That's their right. Their right to have those opinions. There's validity in a lot of those opinions, in my opinion. But from a sporting perspective, it's a disaster for Canada right now. And it's been such a good run for so long that we're not used to having these conversations, unfortunately, but we're back at it again here.
Yes, and it's going to be costing Canada a couple of hundred thousands, if not millions of dollars to still pay Iran, and of course all the travel and the accommodations that won't happen, but still you have to pay for. But that was the breaking news earlier today by Canada Soccer, that Canada versus Iran is canceled. And we can now move on to our Canadian Championship review, Duane. It is time to look at yesterday's matchups in the Canadian Championship. The quarterfinals were wrapping up late last night with Cavalry Vancouver, and it started earlier last night with Montreal and Forge at Stade Saputo. Let's have a look at the scores before we break down all the games individually. Of course, last night, Montreal at home, 3-0 Forge FC, a victory signed Sunusi Ibrahim, who scored a hat-trick at home against Forge FC. 3 assists for Matko Miljevic in this performance. 8 key passes, quite a performance by Montreal's midfield, and Sunusi Ibrahim on this one. Vancouver Cavalry went to penalties, and Vancouver went chalk in the penalties. A lot of nice penalties in that one, to be honest. And Vancouver winning 5-3 from the penalty spot, not letting Cavalry finishing their run. It could have been 5-4, but of course it was done and dusted after the 5th penalty made by Vancouver. Let's start with the battle of the brother, a brother battle, Duane. For the first time ever, Mathieu Chouanière and David Chouanière faced each other at Stade Saputo. A mother's difficult choice of choosing one or the other. Well, she was cheering for both. A beautiful moment with a beautiful family of soccer in Montreal.
I'm sure that after the first 20 minutes or so, she was probably cheering more for Forge just to get one back. But alas, look, yeah, good moment there. It's always fun to see a family moment like that. But in terms of the game, it was disappointing by Forge, I thought, on the night, and perhaps the travel played a bit of role in that. I also thought as I was watching this that Forge, ironically, might be one of the least suited teams to pull a cup set against an MLS team, because they are a skill-based team. They are a team that relies on their offensive flair, their offensive abilities to attack. And that matchup might not work out as well as having, say, Halifax, which relies on defensive solidity, Calgary, which relies on defensive stability and getting stuck in. Style might match up better, because you compare the late game and the TFC Halifax game versus that Forge game, which was too wide open for Forge. Yeah. They were giving Montreal so much time up that one wing in the first 20 minutes, and Montreal wasn't doing anything complicated. They were just going straight at them, and they had a little more athleticism, were able to blow by them on the defensive side of things. Had Hamilton maybe got stuck in with a few tactical fouls, kicked them around a little bit, made it uncomfortable for Montreal, then maybe this is a different game. And I think that might just be, what is it? Styles makes, what's the fighting analogy you always say?
Styles makes fight, but also Vancouver is not as good as Montreal, and Vancouver Cavalry was a little bit less of a gap between the two, to be quite honest. Yeah, we saw that, of course, in that game. We'll talk about it later. Cavalry may be a bit unlucky in the game. We'll talk about that. Let's look now at Montreal versus Forge from a statistical perspective. Here is quite an impressive amount of shots for Montreal. 17, 7 on target, just shy of 40-some%. 3 goals by Sunusi Ibrahim. 59% possession from Montreal, 576 passes, quite a high number. let's not forget we saw Vancouver do 270-something last weekend in Major League Soccer. And a very high 90% pass accuracy, total domination by Montreal in the midfield, in the lanes, Sunusi Ibrahim finding all the space, and of course Miljevic and his selfless play gave Ibrahim his second on a silver platter. Montreal 3, Forge 0, never in doubt. CF Montreal moving to the semifinal of the Canadian Championship. A fun evening at Stade Saputo.
Yeah, as I'm looking at the numbers here, that's why I'm looking to the side. 12 fouls. I just wish Hamilton had got stuck in a little bit more there. That's what it comes down to. And that said, I mean, this is a one-sided match. And you're right, Montreal is, of the three Canadian teams, I don't think there's any doubt that Montreal is the best of them right now. It's not debatable. The numbers speak for themselves. So this is an illustration of what the gap between MLS and what CanPL is when they're playing at their fullest capacity. And this was a highly rotated team for Montreal too, so they are set up well for the weekend as well. Look, it's gone chalk, basically, other than New York. You know, Pacific would have been in there if he had gone complete chalk, but you have one more upset possibility. We'll talk about the Vancouver game in a minute. But ultimately, there still is a gap there, and it's going to be a while, I think, before anyone other than one of the three MLS teams wins this competition. It will be good for the competition when it happens. I don't think as a fan of one of the three teams, and you would probably say the same thing, and I'm sure Vancouver fan would say the same thing, as long as it's not you not our team that was the one that loses it to them, it will be awesome to see. But for seriousness, it will need that eventually. Look, the one thing I thought about this too, overall, as an overall thought before we get into Vancouver, next year with the new CanPL team coming in the Fraser Valley, plus the BC League One team coming in, possibility, that's 15 teams. Find a way to get another team in this thing. That's fine to get the amateur champions or something in there so we can get a 16-team bracket and no buys and just go straight ahead. CSA, do that. Give us a 16-team bracket next year. This competition is fun when you have these matchups, lower versus higher. It gives intrigue, even though, and two of the three games were great games that had a lot of intrigue right to the end when it was MLS versus CanPL. We need more of that. 16 teams next year. That's my call.
You mentioned the heavy rotated lineup from Montreal, as still some of those decisions were taken with the 5 Canadian starter quota in mind. That's why Joe Waterman was marshalling that back line. James Pantemis, Canadian goalkeeper in net, undefeated in the Canadian Championship in his career. 3 games, 3 wins. And that's it. Only wins for James Pantemis in the Canadian Championship. Gabriel Corbeau, Joe Waterman, Robert Thorkelson were your backline from Montreal. Broguillard, Mathieu Choignard, Samuel Piette, and Zoran Basson. A Canadian midfield from left to right in this lineup from Montreal. The famous 3-4-3. Kai Kamara, Sunusi Ibrahim, and Matko Miljevic were your, I guess, attacking trident for Montreal. This was quite an interesting performance by Montreal. Some players vying for MLS playing time. Matko Miljevic really giving himself an argument for some playing time in MLS. Maybe also Zachary Broguillard. We'll see what happens for these players, but a good win for Montreal heading into the the Canadian Championship semifinal versus Toronto FC. And we've talked about Toronto FC yesterday. Before we move on, Duane, I want to look at Forge's lineup, because Forge had not a good beginning of the season in the league. They had the CONCACAF Champions League to distract them, and the CONCACAF League last fall. It's the 4th season with this crop of players for Forge. When we look at Kyle Becker, David Choignard, Abubakar Sissoko, what needs to be changed maybe in Forge? Forge is slowly but surely at crossroads.
They need to get healthy. They haven't been fully healthy this year, and part of that is probably the fact that they played so much over the past couple of years, right? So and they played on turf a lot too, and we can make our own arguments about that, but it certainly is maybe a factor of this as well. That said, there is probably something to be said about the freshness aspect. They did try to address that by adding a couple players, from Campbell, for one, from Pacific, that came over, and a lot of people thought that would, sort of be a plug and play kind of situation, and it hasn't necessarily worked out that way. And that might be just an illustration of, you have a team that came in so familiar with each other in the first couple of years of this league. You come in at 19, it's basically Sigma with a few alumni plugged in there. They are a dominant team throughout the year. They win the first championship. Then you get into that weird island situation where you're just naturally going to have that chemistry stay together. It makes sense to keep that team together. Last year, they're still good, but they play so much. They have the deep runs in the CCL, or not the CCL, the CC, the Canadian Championship League, whatever. The other thing.
CL, yeah, just the CONCACAF League.
Thank you, the CL. Anyway, so all that, but 4 years on, yeah, they might need to freshen things up again. And the other factor too is, these players aren't played a lot, and the salary cap isn't a lot, but you have success, you win championships, you want to keep your core guys together, you might have to pay them a bit more. And that in turn is going to not allow you to develop the kind of depth that maybe you need to be competitive and to continue to be competitive. CanPL is not necessarily going to be a league that's set up for dynasties. I think maybe there's a bit of a skewed view for the first couple of years because those two teams came in with a leg up already, Calgary and Hamilton. And now that that's beginning to even itself out, you have a history with the rest of these teams now, you might not see the same level of split that you had before. And that's, Pacific, they started, for guys that are new to the CanPL, Pacific's first year, they were one of the bottom teams. They weren't the worst team, but they were very young.
Oh, yeah, they were very young, like with Noah Verhoeven, Thomas Meyer-Giga. That was the beginning of that project, different manager. It was a disappointment the first season, and it quickly turned around if we go into history now.
Yeah, and it was all with an eye to the future, though. They launched that team not to win in 19. They launched that team to be good moving up forward. And I'm doing in my graphics, I'm going up in a graph right now and just stay doing that.
No, it's not a plane. It's Duane going up. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think something interesting to see there. And I think in many ways they're silent and they're kind of quietly doing it. I think York has a similar plan. Now they've had some manager turnover, but I think you could see the core of what York's trying to do there as well. And that might be a model more than the we're just Sigma Senior. That's a different way to do it, and maybe they both coexist at the same time, but I don't think that dominance of the top two is going to exist anymore moving forward, and we saw a bit of that. Although we'll talk about Calgary in a minute as we get back to CanPL.
Of course.
Canadian Championship. Too many cans today.
You don't have a can of Diet Pepsi, so that's one can less. That's good.
Yeah.
But on that note, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we will be looking at Cavalry versus Vancouver, another penalty shootout in the Canadian Premier League versus MLS matchup in the Canadian Championship. And no upset, but it was oh so close. For Cavalry, we'll look at the bracket and we'll look at the matchup heading into the semifinal of the Canadian Championship. That and more after this short break right here on Soccer Today.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Kev Larme with Duane Rollins will invite you to please subscribe to our YouTube page in our journey to 1,000 subscribers right here on YouTube. And if you're watching us via podcast, or if you're trying to find us via podcast, we are available everywhere your favorite podcasts are be found. That is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, and everywhere else your favorite podcasts are available. Duane, we've talked about Montreal Forge. Last night, another game took place, and it was Cavalry versus Vancouver. This game took place at Atco Field at Spruce Meadows, and it ended up being played on a penalty spot. That's where it got decided. And Cavalry, they played well, but unfortunately, their second goal was in their own net, and they gave Vancouver a lifeline. I was impressed by Meyer Bevan all game long. I was impressed with Klump, but unfortunately, his own goal spelled doom and forced extra time, which was just a penalty shootout session. And during that penalty shootout session, Vancouver showed their talent from the penalty spot. One save by Cody Cropper was enough to propel Vancouver to the semifinal of the Canadian Championship. They did not look good. They did not look like they deserved the W. But the magic of the cup also exists for bigger teams squeaking out a win at the death to go to the semifinals.
It's a similar game to TFC Halifax, to be honest with you, in the sense that the underdog, the supposed underdog anyway, in terms of the KPL team, had stretches in that game where they looked like they might be on the front foot. And in fact, in Halifax's case, there was a 20-minute stretch in the second half where it looked like they were destined to score that second goal to get the lead. And then in Calgary's half, I would say that there was a similar 20-minute stretch where they looked like the better team after they scored their goal to take the lead in their case. Now, that said, you have to also take an objective step back, and when you're evaluating these games, and look at the MLS teams not as like they are bigger and they should be hammering them, but just in a isolated incident. And when you do that, you can't argue that it was wrong or incorrect or unfair that Vancouver or Toronto won their games. They both did enough to get by on the night. The Whitecaps don't produce a lot of good chances. This is their problem. We've been over this in the MLS side again. Against a highly organized, well-coached, we love Tommy on the show. We're big fans of Tommy Weldon Jr. We know that when we're not speaking out of turn, we say that, and he organizes the team really well.
Best dress coach in the Canadian Premier League by far.
And the hair, I have great jealousy over Tommy's hair. If you're listening, Tommy, I want your hair, but I can't have it anyway. If you're watching the video, you can see why. Look. No, they're a well-coached team, a well-organized organization, and they will continue to have success as long as they continue to put those things in place. But in terms of last night, they'll feel a little unlucky, but they'll also I saw Tommy tweeting this morning that he felt great pride over how well they played and how competitive they were. And look, that shootout, what I will say this, we saw two of them in this round, Pacific and York, and we saw the one last night between Cavalry and Vancouver. Two shootouts involving a lot of Canadian players, and there were a lot of well-taken penalties, including Lucas Cavallini with a Panenka penalty, which
to start the shootout. And
yeah.
I was like, sure, okay, he's not afraid of the moment. Why not? Just go do it. I was like, okay, we see you, Lucas. I see you.
They turned it with a big smirk to the camera, and all my thought was, okay, well, got him on the bench for that game in the quarterfinals of the round of 16 of the World Cup. Yes, I'm dreaming of the round of 16 of the World Cup. Keep on, put him on late in the
Let's have a look at the matchup in the penalty shootout. We saw Vancouver first to kick. So once again, statistics be damned. The first to start the kickoff penalty shootout won for 2 straight days this week in the Canadian Premier League. Lucas Cavallini, the first one to shoot, 1-0. Meyer Bevan tied it up. Diber Casedo went 2-1 for Vancouver. Jose Escalante, one of my favorite names in Cavalry land, scored the tying goal. Dahome scored what turned out to be the third goal for Vancouver. And then it's all tied. Elliot Simmons scored the third goal. It's 3-3. Leonard Owusu scored maybe the nicest penalty of them all. Like a top corner that had left no doubt in where that ball was going. And then Ali Musa, after a good few weeks with Cavalry, he scored a few goals and gave his team some victories. Well, this time he missed his penalty. An easy save by Cody Cropper. The moment got to Musa, some would say. It was also not the best left-footed penalties I've seen. And then Gutierrez for the win to seal it for Vancouver. And the Whitecaps have a meeting, have a rendezvous against York United in the semifinal of the Canadian Championship, Duane.
In Vancouver. If York gets to a final, they'll have earned it because they'll have done 2 cross-country trips and an additional road game to get there. So good for them if that happens. Look, Vancouver, when we saw this draw back in the day, we said, this is a very friendly draw for the Whitecaps. The only thing that made us doubt the possibility of the Whitecaps making the final is that it's the Whitecaps, and not only
it was. I was close with my prediction. I predicted Montreal. That was easy. I was that close with Forge, with Vancouver, like this close of them.
Well, I did pick a shootout last night. I just picked the wrong game. I thought Forge would show a little more. Look, the Whitecaps, it was drawn up for them, and they should beat York. York flying across the country, like coming off an international break. Vancouver will have time to rest up. They should be able to get this done, and then you're looking at probably, if you go chalk, it would be Montreal, Vancouver in the final, and then they're in a little tougher at that point. But you never know because Montreal might rest. They don't do well at BMO Field. Then you got TFC, which is not a great TFC team, and suddenly you have 2 bad teams playing in the Canadian Championship, and who knows, right?
Exactly. Duane mentioned the matchups. Here's your updated bracket with our nice little animation. So thanks to our graphic department for getting this ready. Here's the updated matchup for the semifinal. Vancouver, York United together. Then Toronto FC, CF Montreal. Those games will take place between June 21st and June 23rd. We'll have more details in the coming few days. By the way, tomorrow, CF Montreal will unveil their new logo. And Duane and I will talk off air when we do the show and all that. But tomorrow is a new logo. Quite a birthday present they're giving me tomorrow, Duane.
Oh, happy birthday, Kevin.
It's tomorrow, but we'll take care of it tomorrow.
Yeah. I've seen some hints on it. We'll see. If it's the hints I've seen, I think it might be a little underwhelming. But it's not really for me to decide whether it's whelming or underwhelming. It's up to the Montreal fans, and we'll have a discussion about that tomorrow. I'm sure I'll have an opinion, but
The question is, will I unmute your mic to hear that opinion? You'll know tomorrow.
Still look like a shots? Does it still look like that? That's what I'd say.
Well, we'll see, and we'll have more on that tomorrow. We've talked about the Canadian Championship and the brackets. So it will be a two solitudes derby, a Canadian Classic, Toronto-Montreal at BMO Field, and it'll be Vancouver versus York United. Vancouver has played okay in the championship. York United is playing well, and York United's playing for something here. If they make it to a final, they could play against Toronto for a cup, or it could be against Montreal. A team that York United could maybe think they can do well against. It's all a question of motivation at this point. And can York beat Vancouver? Well, yes, they can. Can Vancouver manage all their matches properly? And can Vancouver punt on the league to prioritize the Canadian Championship? That's the question.
Well, does Vancouver want to be in the CCL next year, or Toronto for that matter? Like, these are questions. Like, obviously, they're going to compete to win. Let's not be wrong here, but intellectually speaking, neither one of those teams is necessarily going to be set up to be competitive in a CCL next year. Now, we don't know what Toronto's going to do in the summer. They have money to spend. How they spend it will determine how well they are down the stretch, and more importantly, into 2023. Pardon me, I'm doing the time machine back. I can answer how good they were in 13. Not good. But Vancouver, we don't expect them to add to this. And if it's the same roster, it might be a burden for them to play in the CCL anyway. Look, from here, it's hard logically to pick anyone but Montreal to win this. I would say that based on what I've seen from Vancouver in these games so far and what I've seen from York in these games so far, it's not going to be an easy out for the Whitecaps. They're going to have to show up to play that game if they want to get the win. And as you say, I'm sure York United, they've had an opportunity to play TFC once already. It was at BMO Field last year. They weren't as competitive in that game as they would have liked to be. I'm sure that they would really relish the opportunity to have another shot at them, particularly if the cup was at line.
Well, and not only that, looking at the bracket, if York wins, they'll actually host Toronto FC in the final. Now, that's the question of how that will be taken care of.
Yeah, I need to double check that, whether they're not going to have a determination on the final again, and it wouldn't shock me if they move that anyway because of the financial considerations. But and people can have that fight when it happens, but the KMPL might wish to share more of the revenue, and 30,000 tickets are more than 5,000. So
yes, and it's also easier to make it to BMO than make it to York Lions Stadium for now. But Duane, that was a fun round in the Canadian Championship, and We'll gather at the end of the month, almost a month from now, for the semifinal of the Canadian Championship. Here's our very too early predictions for the Canadian Championship. I'll start, Duane, and I'm saying Montreal is going to beat Toronto, and I'm saying York United pulls in cup set, and we'll have York United Montreal in the final of the Canadian Championship.
Yeah, I told you yesterday I think TFC is going to somehow win this thing. So I'm not going to back off that, and that's not just me being here. It has to do with Montreal's record at BMO Field, which is less than ideal over its course of its history, as you would probably well know and remember. So we'll see. That said, look, Toronto's got a lot of work to do between then and now. They have to, they've got a little bit of momentum, I would say. Probably internally they're spinning it that way. We will, when we preview the weekend tomorrow, we'll talk a bit about that. But it was a fun round of games, and I'll reiterate my point one more time. We got the natural 15 coming into this league next year. Got to be a way to find one more team to get it in there. 16 teams in the Canadian Championship, the Voyageurs Cup next year. Make it happen, CSA. Full open draw too. 60 teams, open draw. Montreal and Toronto draw in the first round. So be it. That's what needs to happen.
So be it. FA Cup style. Well, kind of. Actually, no. More like very true bracket team. But that could be fun. On that note, we hope you have a great Thursday ahead of you. You can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramie, and this show at Soccer Today SPN. You can find the podcast version of this show everywhere you find your favorite podcast. That would be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and everywhere else you can find the show, like Podcast Addict, and even other places that I don't even know exist. Our show is on there. You can also subscribe to our YouTube page at youtube.com/sports podcasting network and hit on that notification bell. Then you'll be made aware of whenever we upload a brand new podcast. You can find advertising opportunities for this show. You can contact me at sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com. And if you would like to support us financially, very soon, Duane and I will restart the Canadian focus show called the Two Saw Dude Soccer Podcast for patrons only, and you can find the link at patreon.com/sports podcasting network. But as always, until next time, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kev Laramie, and we wish you a great soccer.